Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I need everyone to stop and listen very carefully because what just happened in Washington will leave you stunned. The results are in: 50 votes against, 46 in favor. That's the number on the U.S. Senate's electronic board. They just voted to block my National Emergency Tariff Authority, the authority I use to protect you, to protect families, workers, farmers, and everyone who still believes in the promise of America first. And what hurts my heart the most is this. This time it wasn't just the Democrats. No, it was four of our own Republican senators: Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. Four people who once stood beside me, who swore they would fight for American jobs, for farmers, for children, and for our sacred flag. But tonight they stood shoulder to shoulder with the radical Democrats, and they voted to block the tariffs that are protecting this country. I couldn't believe my eyes. You could feel it like a knife had just been plunged into the heart of America. I wonder, how could they do this? How could they turn their backs on the people who elected them, the people working their fingers to the bone to feed this nation? They didn't just vote against me. They voted against the farmer in Iowa who wakes up before dawn, the steel worker in Pennsylvania sweating for America, and the parents in Ohio losing children to poison flooding across the border. They voted against the soul of America. Mitch McConnell, the man I once helped hold on to Kentucky. Rand Paul, the one who still talks about liberty and principles. Susan Collins, who always talks about balance. Lisa Murkowski, who claims to be independent, but bows to the Washington swamp. And now they've chosen to stand with the other side. They chose politics over principles, weakness over courage, betrayal over loyalty. So tonight I want to ask you, why did they do it? Why stand with the Democrats? Why now when America is fighting to protect itself? What happened behind those closed doors? Who whispered in their ears? What promises were traded? I'll tell you this, my friends. This isn't just about economics. It's about power. They want control. They want to silence you. The workers, the patriots, the true heart of America. When those four senators turned their backs, they thought no one would notice. But I know, you know, and tonight we're going to talk about it, because this isn't just a vote. This is betrayal written in cold numbers on the Senate wall. Stay with me, don't look away, don't tune out, because I'm going to tell you exactly what happened behind those closed doors, who they met with, what they were promised, and why they chose to betray the people who trusted them most. As I started digging into what was really behind those four votes, the truth turned out to be even worse than I imagined. It wasn't about ideals, not about free trade principles, or balancing national interests like they say on TV. No, my friends, it was about power, money, and influence. Mitch McConnell is a Washington veteran, someone all too familiar with donor pipelines and shady deal-making tables. He talks about Kentucky, but when he's sitting at bourbon dinners with big donors, what he really cares about isn't American workers. It's the profits from trade chains linking Kentucky and Canada. He's worried that tariffs will cost bourbon exporters a few percentage points in profits, while tens of thousands of American families are losing children to fentanyl. I once told him, Mitch, sometimes standing up for the country comes at a cost, but if it saves lives, it's always worth it. But he didn't listen. He listens to the people writing checks for his campaigns, not the cries of Kentucky's people. Then there's Rand Paul, who still calls himself the voice of liberty. I used to believe him, used to think he understood what it means to fight for America. But this time he didn't stand with the people. He stood with the corporate lobbyists pushing free trade, the ones who only care about cross-border profits. They told him tariffs are a mistake, that we should let the market self-regulate. But they didn't say that very market is dumping poison and cheap steel into this country. When he voted, he didn't see the devastated neighborhoods. He only saw profit charts. Then there's Susan Collins from Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. They justify it by saying they're just protecting their state's economic interests. Maine relies on seafood from Canada. Alaska lives off oil and northern trade exchanges. They're under pressure from local businesses, from donor threats, that if you don't oppose the tariffs, the state economy will collapse. And so they took the easy path, the path of dependency. They talk about stability and trade balance, but in reality, they're just bowing to economic pressure from our neighbor. I've seen what goes on in those closed rooms at Capitol Hill, where there are no reporters, no public, just power, money, and handshakes. They call it business as usual. They sit around the table whispering about agreements, commitments, political assurances. They laugh, they clink glasses. They say we're just being realistic. But I call it calculated betrayal. A backroom pact between politics and money, where loyalty to America is sold out for trade deals and corporate interests. That's not ideology. That's dependency. A dependency that makes them more afraid of losing their seats than losing the nation. And here's what most people never see: the calls from corporations, the emails from donors, the financial promises whispered before a vote is cast. Most people have no idea how many hands are in that room when a senator votes against their own country. And that night, 4 of them did exactly that, not because they believe I'm wrong, but because they're afraid of upsetting the ones who really pull the strings in Washington. When those votes were cast, it wasn't the politicians in that room who paid the price. It was the ordinary people out there. I think of the farmer in Iowa, the man who wakes up at 4 in the morning, steps out into the misty fields, calloused hands on the wheel of his old tractor. He once told me at a rally in Des Moines, "Mr. President, if you hold firm on the tariffs, we have a chance to sell our crops fairly." He believed that policy was a shield protecting American farmers from cheap foreign goods. But when the Senate blocked the tariffs, imports flooded in. American crop prices plummeted. I see farmers selling equipment, shutting down farms, fields silent in harvest season, not because they're lazy, but because they were betrayed by those who promised to protect them. In Pennsylvania, I shook hands with a steelworker, his hands scarred, his face blackened by furnace smoke. He said, "Sir, my plant just reopened after 10 years. Now they say it'll have to close if the tariffs are canceled." For him, tariffs aren't numbers on paper. They're his livelihood, his kids' meals, the lights in the small home where his family gathers. And when the Senate voted 50-46, that dream vanished. I can picture the morning he walks into the plant. The steel press is silent, the lights dimming, the foreman quietly announcing, "We have to shut down." No shouting, just silence. A silence more painful than any words. In Ohio, I met a mother, her face gaunt, eyes red from crying, holding a photo of her 19-year-old son. The boy died from fentanyl flooding across the northern border. When I announced tariffs on Canada, she sent a thank you letter, saying at least someone is doing something to stop this poison flow. But now, with tariffs blocked, with borders loose again, she can only cry in silence. I can't forget that image. A mother kneeling at her son's grave, wind blowing the small flag on the headstone, and her whispering, "You believed in this country." Those stories aren't in reports, aren't on Senate screens, but they are living truth. When senators talk about global economy, they don't see that out there. People are losing everything: jobs, hope, and lives. When tariffs are blocked, cheap foreign goods flood in, domestic prices rise, jobs plummet, and borders once controlled are wide open again. This isn't an economic debate, it's a human crisis. Every factory closure is a family without income. Every ton of imported steel is an American out of work. Every fentanyl pill slipping across the border is a life stolen. The real American people aren't numbers on a chart. They are people. They are parents, workers, veterans, the ones who trusted, who voted for senators, who promised we'll never turn our backs. And now they're paying the price. I've seen their pain. I've heard their cries. I've held their trembling hands as they said, "Please don't stop." And I promise you, with everything I have, I see your pain, and I will stand with you. I have looked into the eyes of each of them, the 4 who betrayed America, and heard them say they would stand with me, that they would protect America first, and that they would never betray the people who trusted them. I remember the first time I met Rand Paul in Kentucky. We talked about liberty, about coal miners, about the people of Kentucky who just wanted to be treated fairly. He said to me, "I will always stand with the people, never with the powerful." I believed him. But when the moment of choice came, He did not stand with the people of Kentucky. He stood with the Democrats in Washington. I once helped him regain the trust of his home state voters, but he used his vote to protect the interests of free trade lobby groups instead of the workers he once promised to represent. When I saw his name flash red on the board, I didn't feel anger, just a cold disappointment, like a knife in the back. Mitch McConnell is different, a Washington veteran, whose position I once helped solidify, with whom I fought to keep Kentucky in our hands. I remember telling him in a private meeting at the White House, "Mitch, this isn't just policy, it's lives. If we stop fentanyl, we'll save thousands." He looked at me, nodded, said he understood. But when his big donors, the bourbon export corporations and Canadian trade groups, started applying pressure, he chose them over the people. He told the press he was concerned for the local economy, but I know that's not true. He was concerned for his own power. And when he pressed no, it wasn't just a vote against tariffs. It was a vote against the very heart of America. Susan Collins, the senator from Maine, always talks about balance and bipartisanship, about listening to both sides. I believed in the honesty of those words. But when Canada started complaining about tariffs on the seafood industry, and economic groups from Ottawa started making calls, she chose their side. Maine, the state of fishermen, who need clean seas and fair markets, was abandoned to protect the interests of competitors across the border. I once stood beside her at an event. She said, "We need courageous leadership that doesn't sway with the wind." But that night she was the first to turn with the wind. And then Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, the proud, strong state where people live on oil, fishing, and unshakable patriotism. We restored the energy industry together, brought Alaska back as an energy powerhouse of the United States. But when the decisive moment came, she did not stand with America, not with the people of Alaska, but with international lobbyists who feared losing profits. She said she was protecting stable trade, but in reality, she was protecting Canadian contracts more than Alaskan workers' jobs. I saw her eyes in the Senate that night, evasive, cold, and I knew there was nothing left to say. 4 of them, 4 stories, 4 broken promises. They once raised their hands and swore allegiance to the flag, stood before the people talking about faith and freedom, grasped my hand and said, "We will never turn our backs." But they did. They didn't lose their way in a single vote. They chose it. I realized something that perhaps many Americans have never seen clearly. This is not just one vote. It is an entire system accustomed to using you and then selling you out. I understood why they did it. They didn't betray just for money or donor promises. They betrayed because they are afraid. They fear the new, fear change, fear facing an America no longer in their hands. They belong to an old Washington, where power is passed back and forth among the same class, where everything has a price, where the people's voice is drowned out by the whispers of interest groups. They've lived their whole lives in that system, and that system convinced them no one could change it. When I came, I didn't bring them power. I brought them a threat. I threatened their false stability, the seats they've occupied too long, the lavish dinners, where they discuss politics like a card game. They fear a movement that doesn't need them. They fear an America run by the people, not the elite. And that is the real reason. They didn't vote against me. They voted against you. They talk about freedom, but they live by control. They say we support the people, but they tremble whenever the people truly speak. They praise free trade, but they tie themselves to the strings of corporations and foreign governments. They talk about bipartisan unity, but that's just paint over something old, rotten, and calculated. I look back at what happened and understand that this fight is no longer between Republicans and Democrats. It is a fight between the American people and a system that has long ceased to serve them. On one side are real people, farmers, workers, veterans, grieving parents. On the other are politicians who have forgotten whom they exist to serve. I saw Washington clearly that night. The brightly lit buildings, the limousines parked in front of Congress, the lobbyists walking out with satisfied smiles. Meanwhile, outside is a real America, exhausted, left behind. And I ask myself, if they won't fight for you, who will? The answer is clear. I have to. I have to continue this path. even if I walk it alone, because no one else dares touch this system. They may be afraid, but I am not. I am not afraid of the press, not afraid of those in the shadows, not afraid of attacks, because I know I am not fighting for power. I am fighting for the American people, for truth, for this country's future. I know we are being controlled by fear, by lies, by empty promises, but no one can control a nation that has awakened. And I tell you tonight, from the bottom of my heart, it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up. And in the midst of all this, I want you to remember one thing. They can block votes, they can block tariffs, but they cannot block your spirit. They can lock the Senate doors, but they cannot lock the heart of America. I have seen that light in the eyes of the steelworker standing before a reopened factory, in the smile of the Iowa farmer harvesting his first season, no longer choked by cheap imports, in the firm handshake of the young soldier just back from the border. That is the real America. That is the soul they will never understand. When they lie, we stand taller. When they betray, we fight harder. When they forget us, we remind them who the true owners of this country are. I have seen workers wipe oil from their hands and raise the American flag atop the factory pole. I have seen farmers hang the flag in front of their barns, even knowing this season will be lean. I have seen soldiers, in the freezing night, still bow their heads before the flag they swore to protect. That is the America no vote can extinguish. The people in Washington think they can crush you with decisions made in the dark, but they don't understand that America was not built in conference rooms. It was built with sweat, with hands, and with faith. I have said it before, and I will say it again. I will never stop fighting for you, because you deserve warriors, not cowards. When I see children singing the national anthem before class, I know the future is still here. When I see veterans placing their hands over their hearts during the pledge, I know loyalty has never died. They may try to strangle our economy, silence your voices, but they can never extinguish the fire of freedom burning in the American heart. That fire doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. The people who still work, still believe, still love this country, no matter how many times you've been betrayed. From Maine to Alaska, from Kentucky to every small town in this nation, this is your country. My friends, when I saw the dawn light shining on the American flag this morning, I knew that America still has its full strength and faith. That flag still flies proudly, because it does not depend on votes in the Senate, but on the spirit of the American people, who never give up. Every star on that flag is a state that trusted its leaders. Yesterday, 4 senators betrayed that trust. They wounded the oath they once swore. But today, I tell you, America will not fall. From betrayal comes rebirth. From betrayal comes rebirth. They may block tariffs. They may block our will in closed rooms, but they cannot block the will of millions of Americans rising for this nation. From Maine to Alaska, from Kentucky to Texas, I see workers returning to factories, farmers heading to the fields, veterans raising their flags. They are the heart, the soul of America. They don't wait for Washington to save them. They are America. I tell you today, we will not back down. We will rebuild. We will rise. We will stand taller, prouder than ever. Together we will rebuild. Together we will rise stronger, prouder than ever. Remember this, no betrayal can defeat a nation that believes in itself. We have overcome wars, crises, and we will overcome this. Because America's strength does not come from Congress. It comes from you, the great American people. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.